The morning fog hung thick over Heathrow Airport as Flight Sergeant William Thompson adjusted his crisp Royal Guard uniform one final time. The distinctive red tunic and bearskin hat drew curious glances from early morning travelers, but it was the small bronze cross pinned to his chest that truly set him apart. The Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military honor, caught the terminal's fluorescent lights as he walked purposefully toward the check-in counter. William had earned that cross 3 years earlier in Afghanistan, during an operation that would forever change his life. When insurgents had surrounded his unit in a remote valley, he had single-handedly held off enemy forces for over 6 hours, allowing his wounded comrades to be evacuated. The medal came with a pension, recognition, and most importantly to William, a position in the prestigious Royal Guard at Buckingham Palace. Today's journey was particularly meaningful. William was traveling to Edinburgh to attend a memorial service for fallen soldiers, representing not just himself, but the entire Royal Guard regiment. The ceremony would honor 23 brave souls who had made the ultimate sacrifice for their country. As a survivor who carried their memory in his heart, William felt the weight of responsibility to represent them with dignity and honor. At the British Airways check-in counter, William presented his ticket with military precision. The young clerk, Sarah Martinez, barely looked up from her screen as she processed his information. Her fingers moved mechanically across the keyboard, her mind already focused on the hundreds of other passengers she would serve that morning. The significance of the man standing before her, with his decorated chest and solemn bearing, went completely unnoticed. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's been an issue with your booking," Sarah announced, her tone flat and disinterested. She glanced briefly at his uniform, noting the elaborate decoration but failing to recognize its immense significance. "We've had to make some adjustments due to overbooking. You'll need to be moved to economy class." William's eyebrows raised slightly, but his military training had taught him patience and respect for protocols. "I understand these things happen," he replied calmly, though disappointment flickered across his weathered features. However, this ticket was specifically arranged through military channels for official duties. "Perhaps you could check again?" Sarah's expression hardened with bureaucratic indifference. She had dealt with demanding passengers all morning, and this uniformed man seemed like just another entitled customer trying to get special treatment. "Sir, I've already checked. The system shows economy, and that's final. We can't make exceptions just because you're wearing a costume." The word costume hit William like a physical blow. Around him, other passengers had begun to notice the exchange, some recognizing the prestigious uniform and the significance of the Victoria Cross gleaming on his chest. A few whispered among themselves, pointing discreetly at the medal that represented the highest form of military valor. William maintained his composure, drawing upon decades of military discipline. "Ma'am, I respect your position, but this uniform represents service to our country. I'm traveling to honor fallen soldiers, and this booking was made through official military channels." Sarah's patience had completely evaporated. The stress of her morning shift, combined with what she perceived as another difficult passenger, pushed her beyond professional courtesy. "Look, I don't care if you're playing dress-up or what story you've invented. You're in economy, and if you keep arguing, you won't be flying at all today." The terminal seemed to grow quieter as nearby passengers absorbed the shocking disrespect being shown to a decorated war hero. A businessman in an expensive suit shook his head in disgust, while an elderly woman gasped audibly at the clerk's rudeness. Several people began reaching for their phones, sensing that something significant was unfolding before their eyes. William's military bearing never wavered, but those who looked closely could see the hurt in his eyes. This wasn't about seat assignments or personal comfort. This was about the disrespect being shown to every soldier who had ever served, to every family who had lost a loved one in service to their country. The Victoria Cross on his chest represented not just his own sacrifice, but the ultimate sacrifice of countless others who would never come home. "Very well," William said quietly, accepting his boarding pass with the grace and dignity that had defined his entire military career. "I'll take the economy seat." He gathered his small travel bag and moved toward the security checkpoint, leaving behind a check-in counter where Sarah had already moved on to the next passenger, completely unaware of the storm that was about to break over her head. As William disappeared into the crowd, several passengers remained at the counter, their faces showing a mixture of shock and anger at what they had witnessed. Little did anyone know that in just 8 minutes, The most powerful man in Britain would walk through those same terminal doors, and the true magnitude of Sarah's mistake would become devastatingly clear. The security checkpoint buzzed with typical morning activity as William Thompson placed his belongings in the plastic bins. His bearskin hat required special handling, and the security officers treated it with the respect due to an official military uniform. One older guard, clearly a veteran himself, noticed the Victoria Cross and gave William a subtle nod of recognition and respect. "Thank you for your service, sir," the security officer whispered as William collected his items. The brief moment of acknowledgement helped restore some of William's faith in human decency after the humiliating encounter at check-in. Meanwhile, back at the British Airways counter, passenger after passenger approached Sarah Martinez with barely contained anger. Margaret Thornton, a retired teacher in her 70s, was the first to speak up. "Excuse me, young lady, but I witnessed how you treated that soldier," Margaret said, her voice trembling with indignation. "Do you have any idea what that medal on his chest represents?" Sarah rolled her eyes, already exhausted by the morning's drama. "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job. Company policy doesn't allow for special treatment based on clothing choices." "Clothing choices?" Margaret's voice rose an octave. "That was the Victoria Cross. It's the highest military honor in our country. That man risked his life for people like you and me." A businessman named James Crawford joined the growing crowd around the counter. He had served briefly in the Territorial Army and recognized the significance of what he had witnessed. That soldier was clearly traveling on official military business. Your treatment of him was absolutely disgraceful. Sarah's supervisor, Michael Roberts, noticed the commotion and approached the counter. Multiple passengers were now voicing their complaints, and the situation was quickly escalating beyond a simple customer service issue. "What seems to be the problem here?" Michael asked, trying to diffuse the situation with his practiced managerial calm. "Your employee just humiliated a decorated war hero," James Crawford explained, his face flushed with anger. "She called his military uniform a costume and treated him like he was trying to scam his way into a better seat." Michael's expression grew serious as he realized the potential implications. Military relations were crucial for the airline, and any mistreatment of service members could result in significant consequences. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Sarah, can you explain what happened?" Sarah felt cornered and defensive. "Some guy in a fancy uniform was demanding special treatment. I followed company policy and gave him his assigned seat. I don't see what the big deal is." "The big deal," Margaret Thornton interrupted, "is that man earned the Victoria Cross. Do you know what someone has to do to earn that medal? They have to perform an act of valor so extraordinary that it defies belief. They have to risk everything to save others." A crowd had now gathered around the British Airways counter, with passengers pulling out their phones to record the unfolding drama. Social media posts were already beginning to appear, with hashtags like "Your disrespect to heroes" and "Victoria Cross shame" starting to trend. Michael Roberts realized the situation was spiraling out of control. He quickly pulled Sarah aside while his assistant manager took over the counter. "Sarah, I need you to tell me exactly what happened, word for word." As Sarah recounted the encounter, Michael's face grew increasingly pale. He had worked in the airline industry for 15 years and had never encountered such a public relations disaster in the making. The treatment of a Victoria Cross recipient wasn't just a customer service failure. It was a national embarrassment waiting to explode across every news channel in Britain. "We need to find that passenger immediately and make this right," Michael said urgently. "Do you understand the magnitude of what's happened here?" But it was already too late for quiet damage control. Unbeknownst to everyone at the terminal, a very special passenger was about to arrive, and his presence would transform this local incident into a national crisis that would reach the highest levels of government. At that very moment, King Charles III's motorcade was pulling up to a discreet entrance at Heathrow Airport. The king was traveling incognito to Scotland for a surprise visit to military families, the same families affected by the memorial service that William Thompson was attending. Palace security had arranged for the king to travel on a regular commercial flight to maintain the low profile necessary for this deeply personal royal mission. The timing was about to prove catastrophic for everyone involved at the British Airways. Counter, as the most powerful man in the Commonwealth, was mere minutes away from learning about the treatment of one of his most decorated soldiers. King Charles III moved through the VIP entrance of Heathrow Airport with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to power, yet carrying himself with the humility that had defined his approach to monarchy. Today's journey was deeply personal. He was traveling unannounced to Scotland to meet privately with military families who had lost loved ones in recent conflicts, including the families of the soldiers being honored at the very memorial service William Thompson was attending. The King's security detail, led by Commander Patricia Hayes, had arranged this commercial flight specifically to maintain the low profile necessary for such a sensitive visit. Royal protocol typically demanded private jets and elaborate security arrangements, but Charles had insisted on traveling as normally as possible to avoid drawing attention away from the grieving families he planned to comfort. "Your Majesty, we'll proceed directly to the first-class boarding area," Commander Hayes informed him quietly. "The aircraft has been discreetly secured, and the crew has been briefed on maintaining confidentiality." As they walked through the terminal's exclusive corridors, King Charles paused at a large window overlooking the main passenger area. His eyes, trained by decades of public service to notice the mood of crowds, immediately detected the unusual commotion around the British Airways counter. "What's happening down there, Patricia?" the king asked, his brow furrowing with concern. Commander Hayes spoke quietly into her radio, requesting information from her team positioned throughout the terminal. Within moments, she received a troubling report from an undercover protection officer who had witnessed the entire incident with William Thompson. "Your Majesty," she began carefully, "there appears to be a situation involving the mistreatment of a military service member. One of our officers observed a British Airways employee showing significant disrespect to a soldier wearing the Victoria Cross." The king's expression immediately hardened. As a man who had dedicated his life to supporting the military and understanding the sacrifices made by service members, any mistreatment of a decorated soldier struck at the very core of his values. "The Victoria Cross?" King Charles repeated, his voice carrying a tone that Commander Hayes recognized as barely controlled anger. "Tell me exactly what happened." The protection officer's report was delivered with military precision. A flight sergeant in full Royal Guard uniform, traveling on official military business to attend a memorial service, had been publicly humiliated and demoted to economy class, while the airline employee called his uniform a costume and treated him with contempt. King Charles stood in complete silence for nearly a minute, processing the information. As the head of the British Armed Forces and the patron of numerous military charities, he understood better than most what the Victoria Cross represented. Only 1358 Victoria Crosses had ever been awarded since its creation in 1856. Each one represented an act of valor so extraordinary that it transcended normal human courage. "Where is this soldier now?" the king asked quietly. "He's proceeded through security and is likely in the departure lounge, Your Majesty. Our officer reports that he handled the situation with complete dignity and professionalism, despite the humiliation." The king's jaw tightened visibly. "And the airline employee responsible?" "Still at the check-in counter, Your Majesty. There's currently a crowd of passengers expressing their outrage over the incident." King Charles turned away from the window and began walking with purposeful strides toward the main terminal. Commander Hayes recognized the expression on his face. It was the same look she had seen when the king encountered injustice or disrespect toward those who served others. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should handle this through official channels later," she suggested diplomatically. "We could file a formal complaint through the palace press office." "No, Patricia," King Charles replied firmly. "This isn't about protocols or press releases. This is about a decorated hero being treated with contempt while traveling to honor his fallen comrades. Some things require immediate personal attention." The royal security team quickly adapted their formation as the king changed course toward the public terminal. They had trained for countless scenarios, but intervening in a customer service dispute at an airport check-in counter while maintaining operational security was definitely not in any of their standard playbooks. As they approached the still crowded British Airways counter, passengers began to notice the unusual group of well-dressed individuals moving with obvious authority through the terminal. Some recognized the distinctive bearing and profile of King Charles, but most simply sensed that something significant was about to happen. Michael Roberts, the British Airways supervisor, was still trying to manage the growing crisis when he noticed the approaching group. His customer service training kicked in as he prepared to deal with what appeared to be another group of complainants, completely unaware that he was about to face the most powerful customer complaint of his entire career. The distance between the king and the British Airways counter narrowed with each step, and with it, the gap between a local customer service failure and a national incident that would reverberate through the highest levels of British society. Sarah Martinez, still defensive and unrepentant behind the counter, had no idea that in less than 30 seconds, her morning was about to become the most consequential shift of her entire working life. The moment King Charles III approached the British Airways counter, the entire atmosphere of the terminal seemed to shift. Passengers who had been arguing and complaining suddenly fell silent, sensing the presence of someone who commanded absolute authority. Those who recognized the king immediately began whispering urgently to their companions, while others simply felt compelled to step back respectfully. Michael Roberts, still managing the crisis, looked up to see a distinguished gentleman in an impeccably tailored navy suit approaching his counter. The man's bearing suggested importance, but Michael's stress-clouded judgment failed to immediately recognize the monarch of the United Kingdom standing before him. "Good morning," King Charles said with the controlled politeness that those who knew him understood as barely contained fury. "I believe you've had an incident this morning involving the mistreatment of one of my soldiers." The word "my" hung in the air with unmistakable authority. Around the counter, passengers began pulling out their phones again, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. The crowd that had been vocally protesting suddenly became perfectly silent, understanding instinctively that they were about to witness justice being delivered from the highest possible source. Michael Roberts felt his knees go weak as recognition finally dawned. Your Majesty," he stammered, attempting an awkward bow while his mind raced to comprehend the magnitude of the situation. Behind Michael, Sarah Martinez looked up from her computer screen and found herself staring directly into the eyes of King Charles. The color drained completely from her face as she realized that the most powerful man in Britain had personally come to address her. Treatment of the decorated soldier. "I understand," the king continued with measured words, "that Flight Sergeant William Thompson, a recipient of the Victoria Cross and a member of my Royal Guard, was subjected to humiliation and disrespect while attempting to fulfill his military duties." The terminal had become so quiet that the king's words carried clearly to dozens of passengers. Many were now recording the encounter, understanding that they were witnessing a moment that would become part of history. Michael Roberts struggled to find words. "Your Majesty, there has clearly been a terrible mistake. We would never intentionally disrespect a member of the armed forces." "But you did," King Charles replied firmly. "Flight Sergeant Thompson earned his Victoria Cross by holding off enemy forces for 6 hours to save his wounded comrades. He was traveling today to honor 23 fallen soldiers at a memorial service. Instead of receiving the respect due to his service and sacrifice, he was told his uniform was a costume and treated like a fraudulent customer." Sarah Martinez had begun trembling visibly behind the counter. The full weight of her actions was crashing down upon her as she realized she had insulted not just any soldier, but a Victoria Cross recipient, one of the most elite heroes in British military history. "Your Majesty," Michael began desperately, "please allow me to make this right immediately. We can upgrade Flight Sergeant Thompson to first class, provide full compensation, and issue a formal apology." King Charles shook his head slowly. "Mr. Roberts, this isn't about seat upgrades or compensation. This is about the fundamental respect owed to those who serve. Flight Sergeant Thompson didn't seek special treatment. He was traveling on official military business with proper documentation. Yet he was treated with contempt by your employee." The king's gaze shifted to Sarah Martinez, who appeared to be fighting back tears of mortification. "Miss Martinez, I believe you called his uniform a costume and suggested he was playing dress-up?" Sarah could barely whisper her response. "Yes, Your Majesty, I made a terrible mistake. I didn't understand." "You didn't understand because you chose not to look," King Charles replied with the weight of absolute moral authority. Flight Sergeant Thompson's Victoria Cross was clearly visible on his chest. His military documentation was properly presented. Your failure wasn't one of information. It was one of respect. Commander Hayes stood discreetly nearby, ensuring the king's security while allowing him the space to handle this deeply personal matter. She had served in the military herself and understood exactly why this incident had compelled the monarch to take such unprecedented direct action. Around the counter, passengers continued to document the encounter, many wiping away tears as they witnessed their king defending one of Britain's most decorated heroes. Margaret Thornton, the elderly woman who had first confronted Sarah, stood with her hand over her heart, overwhelmed by the sight of personal royal justice being delivered. "Your Majesty," Michael Roberts tried again, "what can we do to make amends for this terrible situation?" King Charles was quiet for a long moment, considering his response. When he spoke again, his words carried the full weight of the crown's authority and the personal passion of a man who had dedicated his life to supporting those who serve others. "Mr. Roberts, making amends isn't about what you can do for Flight Sergeant Thompson now. It's about ensuring that no decorated hero ever faces such disrespect again. This incident reveals a fundamental failure in your company's training and culture." The weight of King Charles's words settled over the British Airways counter like a heavy blanket. Michael Roberts understood that he was facing not just an angry customer, but a constitutional crisis that could destroy careers and damage his company's reputation permanently. The crowd of onlookers had grown significantly, with passengers from across the terminal gravitating toward the unprecedented scene. "Your Majesty," Michael said carefully, "I want to assure you that this incident does not represent our company's values or training standards. We have protocols in place to recognize and honor military service members." King Charles's expression remained stern. "Then why, Mr. Roberts, was Flight Sergeant Thompson told his Victoria Cross uniform was a costume? Why was official military travel documentation dismissed without proper verification? Your protocols clearly failed catastrophically." Sarah Martinez, still trembling behind the counter, finally found her voice. "Your Majesty, I've never seen a Victoria Cross before. I didn't know what it meant. I thought he was just another passenger, trying to get special treatment." The king's gaze fixed on Sarah, with the intensity of a man who had spent decades understanding the sacrifices made by Britain's service members. "Miss Martinez, the Victoria Cross has been our nation's highest military honor for over 160 years. It represents courage so extraordinary that most recipients don't survive the actions that earn it. Flight Sergeant Thompson is one of only 14 living Victoria Cross recipients in the entire world." The gasps from the surrounding crowd were audible as passengers absorbed the true magnitude of Sarah's mistake. Several people began searching on their phones for information about the Victoria Cross, their faces showing increasing shock as they learned about its extreme rarity and significance. 14 living recipients, King Charles continued, his voice carrying deep emotion, out of a nation of 67 million people. Each one represents courage beyond normal human comprehension. Each one has earned the eternal gratitude of our nation through actions that most of us could never imagine attempting. Margaret Thornton stepped forward respectfully. "Your Majesty, many of us tried to explain to the young lady what she had done, but she refused to listen." King Charles nodded, acknowledging her words. "Mrs. Thornton, I'm grateful that passengers like yourself stood up for Flight Sergeant Thompson. It gives me hope that ordinary citizens still understand the debt we owe to those who serve." Commander Hayes discreetly approached the king and whispered something in his ear. The king nodded and turned back to Michael Roberts. "Mr. Roberts, I understand Flight Sergeant Thompson's flight is scheduled to depart soon. I want him located immediately and brought here so I can personally apologize for how he was treated in my country." "Of course, Your Majesty," Michael replied, frantically gesturing to his staff. "We'll find him right away." He grabbed his radio and began coordinating with security to locate William Thompson throughout the terminal. Meanwhile, word of the king's presence had spread through social media like wildfire. Videos of the confrontation were already going viral, with hashtags like Shenos King Defends Hero and Victoria Cross Justice trending across all platforms. News organizations were scrambling to get reporters to Heathrow, understanding that this story would dominate headlines across Britain and the Commonwealth. Sarah Martinez looked up at the king with tears streaming down her face. "Your Majesty, is there anything I can do to make this right? I feel terrible about what I did." King Charles studied her for a moment, seeing genuine remorse in her expression. "Miss Martinez, feeling terrible isn't enough. You have an opportunity to learn from this mistake and ensure it never happens again. Every person who wears a military uniform has volunteered to potentially die for strangers. The least we can do is treat them with basic dignity and respect." The king's phone buzzed discreetly, and Commander Hayes checked it quickly before whispering another update. Flight Sergeant Thompson had been located in the departure lounge, reading quietly while waiting for his flight. Security was discreetly approaching him to request his presence at the check-in counter. "Your Majesty," Michael Roberts said urgently. "We found Flight Sergeant Thompson. He's being escorted here now." King Charles straightened his posture, preparing to meet one of Britain's greatest living heroes face to face. Around the counter, passengers continued to document every moment, understanding that they were witnessing something that would be remembered and discussed for generations. The terminal's announcement system crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, please maintain a respectful distance around the British Airways counter. Thank you for your cooperation." In the distance, a small group could be seen approaching through the crowd. Flight Sergeant William Thompson, still in his immaculate Royal Guard uniform with the Victoria Cross prominently displayed, walked with military precision alongside airport security. He had no idea why he had been summoned back to the check-in area, but his training had taught him to respond promptly to official requests. As he drew closer, passengers began pointing and whispering, many seeing the Victoria Cross for the first time, and finally understanding the magnitude of what they had witnessed earlier. The crowd parted respectfully as William approached, creating a clear path to the counter where the King of England waited to personally address the injustice that had been done to one of his most decorated soldiers. Flight Sergeant William Thompson approached the British Airways counter with measured steps, his military training evident in every precise movement. His eyes quickly surveyed the unusual scene. A large crowd of passengers, several people recording with their phones, and airport security maintaining a respectful perimeter. At the center of it all stood a distinguished gentleman in a navy suit who commanded immediate attention through pure presence alone. Recognition dawned instantly. William's military bearings stiffened further as he realized he was looking at King Charles III. Without hesitation, he came to attention and delivered a perfect military salute. "Your Majesty," William said with the crisp professionalism that defined his service record. King Charles returned the salute with the precision of a man who had spent decades interacting with military personnel, then stepped forward with genuine warmth. "Flight Sergeant Thompson, it is my honor to meet you. I deeply regret that you were subjected to such disrespectful treatment while serving our country." The crowd fell into complete silence, understanding they were witnessing an extraordinary moment between the monarch and one of Britain's greatest living heroes. Many passengers wiped away tears as the full emotional weight of the encounter settled over the terminal. "Your Majesty, no apology is necessary," William replied with characteristic humility. "I understand that mistakes happen, and I harbor no ill will toward anyone involved." King Charles shook his head firmly. "Flight Sergeant Thompson, what happened here wasn't a mistake. It was a failure to recognize and respect the extraordinary service you've provided to our nation. You earned the Victoria Cross through actions that saved the lives of your fellow soldiers. You deserve better from all of us." The king gestured toward Sarah Martinez, who stood behind the counter with tears streaming down her face. "Miss Martinez has something she wishes to say to you." Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling with genuine remorse. "Flight Sergeant Thompson, I owe you the deepest apology possible. I treated you with disrespect and called your uniform a costume. I had no understanding of what your medal represented or the sacrifices you've made. I'm truly sorry for my ignorance and rudeness." William looked at the young woman with the same compassion he had shown to frightened civilians during his deployments. "Miss Martinez, I accept your apology. We all make mistakes, and what matters is learning from them. I hope this experience helps you understand the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect." Michael Roberts stepped forward, addressing both the king and William. "Your Majesty, Flight Sergeant Thompson, British Airways, wants to make amends for this inexcusable incident. We're immediately upgrading Flight Sergeant Thompson to first class, providing full compensation for his travel, and implementing company-wide training to ensure our staff can properly recognize and honor military service members." King Charles nodded approvingly, but kept his focus on the deeper issues. "Mr. Roberts, those are appropriate immediate steps, but this incident reveals something more troubling about how our society views those who serve. Flight Sergeant Thompson shouldn't need special recognition to receive basic courtesy and respect. The king turned to address the crowd of passengers who had gathered around. Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed here today, both the initial disrespect and your collective response to it, says something important about who we are as a nation. Those of you who spoke up for Flight Sergeant Thompson demonstrated the values that make Britain great. Margaret Thornton stepped forward respectfully. Your Majesty, it was our duty to stand up for this brave young man. Anyone with eyes could see the significance of his uniform and medal. Mrs. Thornton, you're absolutely right, the king replied warmly, and your willingness to speak up gives me great hope for our country's character. William Thompson remained at attention throughout the exchange, his military discipline never wavering despite the emotional nature of the moment. King Charles noticed his formal bearing and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Flight Sergeant, you may stand at ease. This is a conversation between fellow Britons who share a commitment to service. William relaxed slightly, though his posture remained respectfully military. Your Majesty, if I may, this experience, while initially disappointing, has shown me something wonderful about our country. These passengers, complete strangers, stood up for what they believed was right. That gives me great pride in the people I've sworn to serve. The king smiled genuinely for the first time since arriving at the counter. Flight Sergeant Thompson, your grace under pressure and forgiveness in the face of disrespect demonstrate exactly why you were chosen for the Royal Guard. You represent the very best of British values. Commander Hayes discreetly approached the king and whispered an update about timing. Both the king and Flight Sergeant Thompson needed to catch their respective flights to Scotland, where their paths would cross again at the memorial service. Flight Sergeant Thompson, King Charles said, I understand you're traveling to Edinburgh for a memorial service honoring fallen soldiers. I will be attending the same service, though my presence there was meant to be unannounced. It would be my honor to travel with you and hear more about the brave souls we'll be honoring together. The offer was unprecedented. The King of England requesting to share a flight with a non-commissioned officer to honor fallen heroes together. William's composure finally cracked slightly as the full emotional impact of the morning's events overwhelmed him. Your Majesty, the honor would be entirely mine, William replied, his voice thick with emotion. The transformation of the situation at Heathrow Airport had been nothing short of miraculous. What began as a humiliating encounter for a decorated war hero had evolved into a powerful demonstration of justice, compassion, and the values that define British society at its finest. King Charles and Flight Sergeant William Thompson walked together toward the first-class boarding area, their conversation flowing naturally despite the vast difference in their stations. The king listened intently as William shared stories about the fallen soldiers they would honor at the memorial service, each name representing not just a casualty of war, but a person with dreams, families, and unfulfilled potential. Behind them, the British Airways counter buzzed with activity as Michael Roberts coordinated immediate changes to company policy. Sarah Martinez, still emotional from her encounter with both men, was enrolled in an intensive military awareness training program that would begin immediately after her shift. The incident had become a catalyst for airline-wide reforms that would benefit military personnel for years to come. The crowd of passengers gradually dispersed, but not before many approached the counter to leave their contact information, wanting to serve as witnesses to what they had seen. Margaret Thornton exchanged information with several other passengers, forming an impromptu group dedicated to supporting military families and ensuring that such disrespect never happened again. As news of the incident spread through social media and traditional news outlets, the story took on a life of its own. Videos of the king's intervention went viral across the globe, with millions of viewers witnessing firsthand how a true leader responds to injustice. The hashtag Royal Justice began trending worldwide, with people sharing their own stories of military service members who had faced disrespect and calling for better treatment of veterans everywhere. During their flight to Edinburgh, King Charles and William Thompson sat together in a configuration that would have been unimaginable just hours earlier. The king learned about William's childhood in a working-class family in Manchester, his decision to join the army after witnessing the September 11th attacks, and his ongoing struggles with survivor's guilt following the action that earned him the Victoria Cross. Your Majesty, William said quietly as they flew over the Scottish countryside, I want you to know that what happened this morning Both the disrespect and your response to it will stay with me forever, not because of how I was treated, but because of how you showed that every person who serves matters to you personally." King Charles looked out the aircraft window at the rolling hills below, thinking about the families they would soon meet, families who had lost everything in service to their country. Flight Sergeant Thompson, the crown exists to serve the people, and the people who serve deserve our highest respect and protection. What happened today reminded me why that responsibility must never be taken lightly. The memorial service in Edinburgh proved to be one of the most moving events either man had ever attended. King Charles's unscheduled appearance brought unprecedented attention to the families of fallen soldiers, resulting in a surge of public support and donations to military charities. William Thompson delivered a eulogy that left not a single dry eye in the cathedral, honoring his fallen comrades with words that captured both their courage and their humanity. In the weeks that followed, the Heathrow incident continued to generate positive change throughout British society. British Airways implemented comprehensive military recognition training for all customer-facing employees, becoming a model for other airlines across Europe and beyond. Sarah Martinez, who had become the unintentional face of the incident, threw herself into learning about military service and sacrifice. She volunteered at veteran support organizations and eventually became one of the company's most knowledgeable advocates for military travelers. The ripple effects extended far beyond the aviation industry. Schools across Britain began incorporating lessons about military honors and sacrifice into their curricula, ensuring that future generations would understand the significance of medals like the Victoria Cross. Margaret Thornton, the retired teacher who had first stood up to Sarah, started a nationwide campaign called Recognize and Respect that educated civilians about military service and encouraged them to speak up when they witnessed disrespect toward service members. Flight Sergeant William Thompson found his life changed in ways he never expected. The public attention from the incident led to speaking opportunities at schools and military events, where he shared not just his own story, but the stories of the 23 fallen soldiers he had honored at the memorial service. He used his platform to advocate for better mental health support for veterans and to ensure that the sacrifices of all service members, living and dead, were never forgotten. King Charles maintained a personal relationship with William, occasionally inviting him to Buckingham Palace for private conversations about military affairs and veteran support. These meetings informed royal policy and helped ensure that the monarchy remained connected to the real experiences of Britain's service members. The broader impact of that morning at Heathrow Airport proved that sometimes it takes a moment of injustice to reveal the true character of a nation. The incident showed that Britain, at its core, remained a country that valued service, sacrifice, and standing up for what's right. It demonstrated that respect for those who serve isn't just a policy or protocol. It's a fundamental expression of national character. Years later, when people recalled the story of the airline employee who demoted a Victoria Cross recipient only to face the personal intervention of the king, they remembered it not as a tale of punishment, but as a powerful example of how individual actions, both negative and positive, can create waves of change that touch countless lives. The bronze Victoria Cross still gleamed on William Thompson's chest during ceremonial duties, but now it carried additional meaning. It represented not just his own moment of extraordinary courage in Afghanistan, but also the courage of ordinary citizens who stood up for him, the integrity of a king who personally defended justice, and the capacity of the entire society to learn, grow, and become better through confronting its failures with honesty and determination.